I'm Andrew, and today I'm going to show you how I saved this cleaver from winding up in the trash. I found this cleaver at a flea market. It was rusty and beat up, but it was stamped with high carbon steel, so I knew this was probably a pretty decent blade. The first thing I did was to clean it up some on the wire wheel. Then I took off the old handle. It was loose and kind of funky. Popping out the brass rivets wasn't as easy, and it took some work prying and punching and drilling, but it finally came free. I was kind of surprised when I got it apart that this wasn't a full tang blade, but there's plenty of metal to work with here. I took it to the belt sander and cleaned up the steel some more. This was much more effective than the wire wheel and helped to clean up some of the dings in the blade too. I started laying out the handle on a piece of walnut. I decided to go a little oversized with the new handle. I used the jigsaw to rough this out. It's always a little tedious to use my old jigsaw, but it did a decent job. After that, I carefully split my handle blank in half on the table saw. If I had a bandsaw, I would have used it to cut it out and to cut it in half. Then I started laying out the recess for the steel in the handle. I used a router to rough out that cut, setting it just deep enough to make enough room for the handle. Then I cleaned up the recess with a chisel for a perfect fit. I drilled out the holes for the pins through the handle scales, and then put that in place with epoxy and glued the rest of the handle together with wood glue. I put some copper nails through the holes for alignment, clamped it, then came back to it the next morning. That's when I trimmed up the nails, peened a head on them like a rivet to help hold the handle together, and then started to shape the handle. The belt sander wasn't taking away the material fast enough, so I used some rasps and files to rough in the shape. Then I cleaned it up by hand with some sandpaper and finely steel wool. I really like how the walnut looks when polished to a high grit with fine steel wool. I sealed this up just with paste wax. I'm not planning on letting this thing sit in water, so I didn't use a real penetrating finish. Finally, I polished the blade with a cheap polishing wheel on my drill, and that really brought this thing back to life. I know nothing about sharpening a blade, but I did manage to get a decent edge on this. It's pretty great to take a $1 flea market find and bring it back to life, and it's been handy to have this around the kitchen as well. I really like the heft of it. It's a nice heavy blade, and I like that the handle fits my hand perfectly because I made it myself. Thanks for watching. If you like it, give me a thumbs up. If you got a comment, throw it down below, and if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. I'm trying to stay more active here and post more projects. Thanks a lot.